Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Growing Places, where we uncover the stories of the entrepreneurs and innovators who are changing the way we eat. My name's Nate, I'm from Urban Leaf, I'm your host today, and really excited for today's guest. We are going to be talking about how to make a carbon neutral smoothie. I think that's right, Jonas. Well, almost carbon neutral. We'll try to get as carbon neutral as we can. And as well as a broader conversation about carbon emissions from the food system, which is a really, really interesting topic. So I'm excited to dive into this. But before we do, we should welcome our guest. Jonas Günther is one of the co-founders of We Are the New Farmers. And I'd like to welcome to the channel. Welcome, Jonas. Great to have you here.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
Our absolute pleasure, absolute pleasure. So Jonas, listen, before we start talking about carbon emissions and kind of diving into all the details here, I was wondering if you could just quickly introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what you guys do over there at We Are the New Farmers.
Yeah, absolutely. My name is Jonas, if you can tell by my last name, originally from Germany, and I came to New York in 2016. And actually to study here for my master's degree, and that quickly evolved into a startup that I'm running today. We call ourselves We Are the New Farmers, and we are an urban farm. We're located in Sunset Park, Brooklyn, and we cultivate the microalgae Spirulina. So for those of you who haven't heard of Spirulina, just real quick, I'm sure we have a chance to talk about that a little bit later. It's the small cousin of the more popular seaweeds like Kelponori. It's really tiny, just unicellular, and it's an excellent source of all kinds of nutrients, especially plant-based protein. And we think it's one of the most viable options to move forward into a carbon neutral food production, which is one of the reasons why we started cultivating it.
Okay, cool. Well, thank you for the intro. So, you touched on one of the topics we're going to be talking about today already, which is sort of carbon emissions and the environmental impact of food. Can you tell us a little bit more about why this was an important problem for you and something that you guys wanted to kind of, commit yourself or dedicate yourselves to solving?
Yeah, I mean, the truth is it's not only an important topic for me, it's an important topic for pretty much everyone, right? Like, if we look at what's going on, we have about 10 years left to fight climate change and to avoid unrepairable damage from a changing environment. So it is really what I think the topic of our time. And even though Corona is very present right now, we sometimes forget about the importance of climate change and the impact of it. And I always like to take a step back for one moment just to clear out some things. And number one and most important is climate change is real, of course, and actually 99.9% of all scientists around the world agree. The few very loud ones are there, but they are not right, or the majority of scientists agree that climate change is a thing and it will have severe impacts on our life. And one of the things that has a major impact is food, and I'm incredibly interested personally in food. I always love to grow food. My mom had a little patch in our garden that I used to grow things in when I was just a little boy. I would say I would grow flowers and vegetables. She would say I would grow weeds. Um, and that always was something that was accompanying me, and I always loved doing that. And at the same time, I also I love technology. I'm an engineer, and that's my background. And I always wanted to use technology to really advance those kind of things. And initially, I always thought that food and tech are kind of things that go against each other. Like there's the nature and there's the tech. But I also realized at some point that you cannot really make advancements in food and solve the problems that we have without relying on tech. So that really was the starting point for me to look into how can we do more with food, make it more sustainable, and make it something that doesn't cause climate change, but potentially fight climate change.
Got it. And you mentioned just now that you think we have 10 years to kind of figure this out or get to a solution. What is it that's so important about that 10-year window? And, why is it not 5 years or 20 years?
Yeah, so the way to think about it is really as a budget of CO2 emissions that we have. We know we have this 2-degree goal, or the threshold that we need to reach, after which point we will see chain reactions where the Arctic and the glaciers are melting, currents are coming to a halt, like all of those things that we know are going to happen and will be unstoppable at that point. So we have a certain amount of carbon emissions that we can emit up to the point where we surpass this 2-degree threshold. And looking at how much we're emitting right now, and if we just continue the way we do, we have exactly 10 years left until this budget is used up. If we save some CO2 on the way and save some emissions, we might be able to stretch it by another year. If we accelerate, we might lose another year. But pretty much anyone, United Nations to scientists around the world, agree that we reach this threshold in as little as 10 years.
Got it. Okay. So, that's not a lot of time to figure this out. What's your views on how and why we kind of got into this situation? How did things kind of get to be as messy and, as inefficient as they are when it comes to food?
Well, when it comes to food, and I can't really speak to the overall industry, I think that's a whole different discussion. But I think the starting point for food really is when we started to industrialize food, and that was around the Second World War, when we were able to synthesize fertilizers for the first time artificially from fossil fuels in Haber-Bosch way of using petroleum to turn that into nitrates, which was back in the time, it was a great invention. It was fantastic because people were starving, and we were suddenly able to produce a lot more food with a lot less inputs. And that brought us to where we are today. And if we compare our food systems to 100 years ago, we have a lot less hunger, we have a lot more stability. Most of the developed countries have a lot of food security. It's not perfect, but at least we can actually feed a lot of people around the planet. But what it also did is it started to detach us from the natural cycles of what Earth can actually provide in terms of nutrition to the population. We have an overpopulation now, the soils are getting depleted, there's simply not enough nutrients in the soil, so we need to add more artificial nutrients, which in turn leads to a lot more output. So the population grows up, we will have more population. So we need to increase the amount of arable land. We start deforesting the Amazon and other areas around the world. And we start getting into this chain reaction of needing to produce more, growing the population, needing to produce more, and losing more and more of our wilderness, losing more and more of the natural ways of actually cultivating the land.
Got it. And to kind of tie all this into what you guys are working on, could you tell us a little bit more about exactly what spirulina is, and how and why you think it should be part of the solution here?
Yeah, I really need to take a step back here, because we need to look into all the things that are actually wrong in the supply chain and in everything that is food related. Because we talk about carbon emissions and we talk about the problems that we have in our food system, but it's not an isolated thing. You cannot just say, hey, it's the farmers that do something wrong, or it's the grocery stores that do something wrong. There are mistakes all along the way. Yeah. And one of the things that really inspired me about spirulina is that it solves a bunch of different problems. It provides a lot of nutrition alongside of the macronutrients like protein that we need so desperately to be sustainable. It is an extremely efficient organism. It is actually 3.6 billion years old. It's one of the first photosynthetic active organisms on the planet. It's the reason why we have oxygen on the planet. It's that old. And that means that its metabolism is extremely efficient. So we only give it a few resources. Some of them is carbon. So we feed it carbon. And then it grows pretty quickly, and
Hmm.
it's also resilient. So when we see this changing environment right now, where climate change is becoming more important and the supply chains are breaking down due to corona, and we see hurricanes and storms and floodings, we need to make sure that we still have a resilient supply chain that isn't impacted by that kind of stuff. So spirulina really fits very neatly into this. And maybe I should actually explain what spirulina is a bit more in detail. I haven't really said much about that. So it is a microalgae, which
Hmm.
means it's a tiny version of the algae that we know. It's unicellular, and it's sometimes called blue-green algae. Um, it traditionally occurs in Africa as well as in Mexico, and in two very specific locations. And it has been consumed around the globe for centuries. We know that Aztecs used to eat spirulina as part of the diet. They were actually giving it to their messengers as some kind of like ancient Red Bull drink.
Hmm.
So
Is that
like
right?
they would take it to get extra energy. We know that up until today, certain tribes in Africa around Lake Chad are consuming this type of algae as a sauce and as almost like a seasoning. And from those two places, it spread around the world, from Southeast Asia to the United States and the Western world, where it's primarily known as a nutrient supplement and as a powder.
Hmm.
But it really isn't a powder nutrient supplement. It is a food, and that's how we think about it.
Okay, got it. So, I guess, like you, Jonas, I get the problems with the food system. I I understand and appreciate a lot of the dilemmas that you're kind of pointing to. But one of the things that I find really curious about this, and I think a lot of people would probably be, in the same situation. They'd say, yeah, okay, like maybe not in the same level of detail that you do, but they would say, okay, I'm like, conceptually aware of some of these issues. But I feel like a lot of individual consumers, where they're one of 9 billion people, and they kind of think that, hey, like, even if I was an absolute model citizen for the entire planet and I did everything perfectly, I am 1/9 billionth of the people here, and that's not really going to move the needle. And what we would need to do to move the needle in a material way is to, some might argue, and I don't know if you agree with this, but some might argue that you really need for it to be kind of a policy-driven type approach, and maybe it needs to be, driven by the government or governments. What's your view on that, and how would you kind of respond to someone that had that kind of view on things?
Yeah, that is absolutely right. I came from that position where I was like going to Starbucks and ordering an oat milk latte instead of a normal dairy latte is not enough that to actually change the world. The problem is way too big that you
Mm,
as an individual, just by a small change of behavior, actually is going to have a big impact. It is a systematic issue.
mm-hmm,
And a systematic issue requires an approach from a lot of different angles, right? So yeah, there's no way we will conquer climate change without governments willing to actually establish some rules and force people in the right direction. At the same time, governments will not move if individuals are not demanding certain things from the governments. But the private sector is required here too, and that's where I feel like I can have the biggest impact. I think we need
mm,
to develop technologies. We need to follow this lead and provide alternatives that have better carbon emission and carbon footprints. And so it's not a solution that can be solved on an individual level,
mm-hmm.
but that doesn't mean that your decisions on an everyday life don't have an impact and don't shape the future in which we're going.
Got it, got it. So on the topic of, I guess, individuals and individual behaviors, another thing that really interests me, or I find kind of a little bit peculiar, is that you can talk about all of these climate change problems and sustainability problems, and you know as an individual consumer, it can be difficult at times to feel like you can really move the needle there. But despite the sort of environmental issues that exist, and we can both kind of acknowledge that they're real and that they're there. I think from an individual consumer level, there's kind of other things that are maybe even having a bigger impact on people's health. So if you look at like, a decision to eat McDonald's, for example, the impact that that is going to have on your personal health is arguably greater than the impact that it would have on the environment. Um, so yet people still do it, despite those adverse impacts to your personal health. I guess where I'm going with this is that um, like if individual health and the near-term impacts that one can feel there are not enough to kind of change consumers' behavior, then do you think it's fair or realistic for us to assume that an environmental approach would change someone's behavior? Because that, if anything, is like, a smaller impact on an individual basis.
So the meaning, or what you're asking basically, is whether the individual can be convinced to change their behavior by advertising environmental benefits over health benefits.
Yeah, basically, yeah. I mean, do you think it's
we had to learn the hard way that's not possible.
Yeah.
As much as people love to think about sustainability and make that like an important core of their decision making. The truth is, when you walk into the supermarket, you think about the recipe that you want to make, and you buy the ingredients that are important to you, or you are on the go and you feel like a burger and you just get a burger, which is honestly fine, because I am a big advocate of a diverse and fulfilling food system. Like, I'm not like, the future of food can't be restricting. It can't be, oh, we can't eat this, and meat is not on the menu anymore. I think it needs much more a approach where the solutions that are on the table are sustainable, and that there is an awareness of, okay, yeah, maybe I have meat, but not every single day. And I think that awareness is much more important than trying to convince people to not go to your local fast food chain because of environmental reasons. Because we all know that we don't go to the local fast food chain because we're eating healthy there and that's the perfect spot. It's just what we feel like and what we have a craving for. And sometimes you want to enjoy that. Food is also culture. It needs to taste good. That's so important.
For sure. Well, on that topic, one of the things that I promised people today, Jonas, was that you're going to teach us how to make a carbon neutral smoothie. So that sounds like the perfect segue into smoothie making. Where do you begin with making your smoothies at home?
By stating that that's already absolutely impossible to make a carbon neutral smoothie.
Well, let's get it as good as we can. Get it as good as we can.
I want to real quick explain why this is so impossible today and why that's important, and then we go into how to actually make this, because I think that's something that people often don't realize. If we actually want to tackle climate change, and if we actually want to like go to carbon neutral within 10 years, like, in many industries, we have solutions, but there's just not enough willingness to actually implement them. So think about energies, right? Like, if we want to, we could be completely on renewable energies within the next 5 years. It costs money, but we have solar panels, we have wind energy, we have hydro energy, we have all of those technologies available. When it comes to food, that's not the case. We don't have any viable, scalable option to actually go to carbon neutral in any foreseeable future. All the options that we have are coming short on some sort of, like whether it's organic. I love this example of organic, and that feeds perfectly into the smoothie. Organic is great, but it's not as productive as like anything that we have today. So if you want to go completely organic, you will need to use a lot more land to produce the same amount of food. And if you use a lot more land, you need to start like cutting down trees, which is kind of the worst thing you want to do if you actually want to preserve the climate. So it's impossible to actually get to completely carbon neutral, but you can make decisions in your morning smoothie or in everyday cooking that have an impact and lower the carbon footprint quite significantly. And now to the smoothie.
Absolutely. Let's dive in and talk about smoothies. Take it away.
So You told me you're a smoothie maker yourself, right?
Correct.
So how do you start making a smoothie?
So things that I would always put in it is milk. I usually use oat milk. I often actually add oats in addition to oat milk, just to give it a little bit more sort of texture and make it a bit more filling. Then I will, whatever greens, fruits, stuff I've got lying around. I think you're about to tell me that I probably shouldn't be using as much avocado as I do, but yeah,
Good
that's
point.
basically it. Oh, and I usually put ice in there as well, just to kind of chill it a little bit, and give it a bit more sort of consistency.
So let's take a one step at a time. Then we
Hmm.
have the milk. That's what you start with. Like nut milk, oat milk is an excellent starting point. Replace any kind of dairy product, any kind of dairy milk, with something plant-based. That has a huge impact because on animal-derived products, whether that is the meats, obviously, but also milk, cheese, eggs, that kind of stuff has a incredibly high carbon footprint because you need so much like inputs for this. You need the land for the cattle to live on. You need the land for the crops that will be fed to the cows. So there's a lot of energy that goes in, but very little energy that goes out. So starting by replacing traditional dairy milk with oat milk, hemp milk, soy milk, from a pure carbon perspective, those are pretty much equivalent. There are other considerations. For example, almond milk has a very high water footprint. But that's when we just look at the carbon footprint. That's not really a big impact on the overall balance. Then the next thing is all your fruits. What kind of fruits are you using? Like, do you use local seasonal fruits, or do you put in bananas, mangoes, pineapples, and well, avocados? Well, those tropical fruits, they need to get to us. They don't happen to grow in a Brooklyn backyard. It's just way too cold here. So the way to get those products to us is by air shipping. So we have a huge transportation cost here in terms of emissions. On the contrary, if we compare that to local seasonal apples, they literally come from upstate. They have been harvested the same day. There's no time for storage in between. When it comes to local and seasonal product, you're always better off than anything tropical. Now that said, it's getting cold outside. Right now, Bounty is great, but give it another 3 months, and all you can put in your smoothie is cabbage and some carrots maybe, and
Yeah,
that's not
I
really
really don't
fun.
like the sound of a cabbage smoothie. I'm sorry, Jonas. I don't think that's going to fly.
Yeah, no, I'm totally with you, and that's where frozen product really come into play.
Uh-huh.
And frozen fruits actually have an amazing carbon footprint. Surprisingly, yes, there's energy that needs to go into it initially, but we cut a lot of the food waste out of the equation, so a lot less food gets just thrown away, which has a better result on the carbon impact. And when it comes to tropical fruits like pineapple and mango, they can be frozen where they're grown, and then they can be shipped on a boat, which is much more environmentally friendly compared to air shipment. So frozen fruits are definitely a good backup solution. Not only environmentally, but also from a health perspective, nutritionally.
Got it. So we have a question here from. So I'm getting a little
Okay.
bit of reverb there. I'm not sure if that's your end or mine, but let's see if I can. Have a question here from someone you might recognize, Rob Elliott. I know you touched on the nut milks quickly, but do you, and I had a chart up earlier, the chart that you'd sent me about like dairy versus oat milk. Do you have any sort of similar numbers or comparable numbers for nut milks, and do you know kind of where they would be on that chart that we had up earlier?
Yeah, so I looked into this when I tried to create a recipe, and the truth is, like with so many things when it comes to carbon and food. There are not a lot of really good numbers out there, and it depends. Like where are the ingredients grown? How is it processed? How does it get to you? But overall, when it comes to almond versus oat milk versus soy milk, if you just look at the carbon emissions, they're pretty much equal, and there's not a big difference between the different plant-based milks.
Got it. Got it. Okay. Um, so we've covered smoothies pretty comprehensively, and I feel a lot more confident now in my ingredient selection. I wanted
Yeah.
to kind of change tact a little bit here, Jonas, and ask you about how to get people to try new foods. Um, you're obviously a spirulina farmer. It's a microalgae.
Yeah.
It's something that most people probably don't even know what it is, let alone have actually tried it before. Could you tell us a little bit about some of the things that you've learnt over the last few years in the process of actually selling this product? What have you found is kind of effective in persuading or convincing people who've never heard of this and they're going, oh my God, what is that stuff? Like, how do you convince them to give something totally new a try?
Yeah. That's the moment from my learning where I like take off my sustainability hat and like put on my business hat, because one of the learnings that we really had is you need to start with a product that works for people and solves a problem. That's not just, hey, here, look at us, we're sustainable. Like no one's going to buy food purely because we tell them this is sustainable. It needs to fit into their everyday lives. It needs to have a routine. It needs to have emotions. It needs to, in our case, have a nutritional benefit to people. So you need to lead with that, whatever it is that you're selling. And in our case, it is that spirulina is incredibly nutritious. It's a great source of a variety of vitamins and minerals. It's a great source of plant-based protein. So if you're following a diet where you really care about the nutrient content of the food that you eat,
Mm-hmm.
or if you start trying to get into a diet where you want to become healthier and get the nutrients that your body needs, that's the people that you want to talk to, and that's the arguments that you provide.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have to give them an idea of how to actually use this product, particularly with something that is so new, right? Like
Right.
spirulina, fresh spirulina in particular, which is what we do, which is already very different to the spirulina that a lot of people know. You need to provide a way for them to easily incorporate that into their everyday lives. I'm a
Mm-hmm.
spirulina crazy person. I'm like, okay, I'm trying all kinds of different things, but I'm only doing that with spirulina. When I see something in the supermarket shelf that intrigues me, then I buy that, but only if I know exactly what I'm going to do with that, because I don't want to waste it, right? So it's really about providing a clear path on how to use the product, and a clear benefit and clear value. And then the sustainability part comes on top of that. I'm not forgetting that in what we do with our business, and not forgetting that when I communicate that with our customers.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not why people buy the product in the first place.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that absolutely makes a lot of sense. So, I guess what you're saying is that you really need to focus on problems that customers know they have, and not try to sell them solutions to problems that they don't care about, or don't know that they have. I'm curious to explore this a little bit further. I mean, we've talked about it in kind of big picture general terms, but are there sort of certain profiles or customer demographics that you have, like, specific pitches for? And do you have kind of I'm putting you on the spot a little bit here, I'm sorry, but do you kind of have a library or repertoire of your top two or three, most persuasive pitches? Like if you wanted to convince a friend or a family member to give this a go, what would you actually say to them? How would you do it, and how would you get them to kind of be interested?
Well, I would tell them that spirulina is probably the easiest way to make sure you get the nutrients that you need in your everyday life. We have those wonderful tiny little frozen spirulina cubes that are made for smoothies or juices in the morning. And one single cube has the same amount of nutrients as 2 cups of fresh leafy greens. And 2 cubes have the same amount of nutrients or same amount of protein as a chicken egg. So they're
Wow.
incredibly dense in nutrients. They're incredibly great when it comes to protein.
Wow.
And they really simplify your life when you want to make sure that you're eating healthy, and you don't want to worry about like your greens spoiling in the fridge, or like how do I actually put together my smoothie and make sure I get everything. Like just pop this thing in there and you're good for the day.
Hmm. Cool. Well, you made it all sound very, very easy to get on board the green train here. And what I really, really like about your approach here is that you are, yeah, kind of focusing on the personal benefits and focusing on the nutritional value of this stuff and making the environmental stuff like, an easy ancillary win, I guess, is how I'd put it. And I think it's a very smart way to kind of go about this sort of stuff.
Yeah, they need to go hand in hand, right? Like I always say, you can't be sustainable without being financially sustainable. Like we are still a business, and there are plenty of other companies that, or other groups of people that try different approaches, whether that's NGOs or whether you want to go into policy. And I think those are all like they need to happen at the same time. But we decided to go down the path as a business, and as a business, we need to adhere to market rules. We need to find people that are willing to pay for a product. Otherwise, all the sustainability benefits that we're creating are not going to be like for a very long time.
Yeah, totally. I hear you. I hear you. Well, Jonas, this has been fantastic. I have really enjoyed the conversation. Great having you on and telling us a little bit more about how to eat greener and healthier and more sustainably. Where can people find you online if they want to learn more about you guys, We Are the New Farmers, and what you're all up to?
Yeah, so if you want to check out our fresh spirulina, we have a website, new-farmers.com. That's where you can place an order, try out some fresh spirulina, some fresh frozen spirulina, find plenty of recipes, learn more about where we're coming from and where we're going. And but of course, nowadays we also have social media. Most important, our Instagram. We are the New Farmers, where you can learn a lot about what we're up to, like behind the scenes. With plenty of recipes there as well. And yeah, come check us out.
Superb. Thank you so much, Jonas. So, guys, do check them out if you're keen to learn more about spirulina and getting your daily dose of green supplements and nutrient goodness. We're going to wrap things up here, but once again, my name's Nate from Urban Leaf. You have been listening to or watching Growing Places. It's our new series where we uncover the stories of the entrepreneurs and innovators just like this guy who are changing the way that we eat. Thanks again for being on the channel, Jonas. Pleasure to speak with you, and we'll keep
Thank
rolling
you.
again soon. Thanks, guys. Bye.
Thank you.